Welcome back, Sebastian here. So time for my review for the sprint and for qualifying for the 2024 Qatar Grand Prix. So let's get started right away with the sprint. So for the sprint, Norris started on pole, Russell P2, Colapinto and Perez were both opting to start from the pit lane. I expect basically both of them making setup changes, trying to figure out what's best, what would be best for qualifying and of course for the Grand Prix tomorrow. So most drivers were expected to be on the medium tires and all of them were. Except for Joe, who decided to gamble on the soft tire. A gamble that I don't think paid off at all. But nonetheless, it was a gamble that for a team like Sauber, it's one that's, a pretty easy decision to make, in my opinion. So Norris actually keeps the lead on pole position. That's one of the things that's obviously kind of been a running joke over the course of the season so far, where Norris started on pole, losing the position into the first corner. So that was a good sign for him. It's definitely something that, if he wants to challenge for the championship next year, obviously we don't know anything about the pecking order for next year as of now, but it's one of those things that's definitely, I think he can definitely improve on. So that was definitely a good start for him. Russell loses a position on the opening corner, loses a position to Piastri, which I think, given how things in the sprint played out, I think that was actually very important to how the end result played out as well. So you basically had a McLaren 1-2, Russell third. Definitely not what, for example, Ferrari would have been hoping for as they were trying to challenge for that Constructors' Championship. Two other drivers with pretty bad first laps. Lawson lost 7 positions, so definitely a rough one for him. And for Verstappen, he lost 3 positions as well, so he was down in 9th after the opening lap. So unfortunately, after that, not a whole lot happened in the sprint. You basically had Russell trying to put pressure on Piastri, trying to overtake him. And that happened a couple times starting on lap 4. Then you did have a couple overtakes, though. Lawson overtook Zhou for P16. Of course, like I said, Zhou was on the soft tires, and those tires went off very, very quickly, and he would actually end up pitting on lap 8. Verstappen makes up a position after his bad opening lap, gets past Gasly at turn 1, and moves up into the final points paying position in the sprint. Leclerc as well, he would get past Hamilton at turn 1 up into P5. So a good move there by Charles on his future teammate in 2025. And they had a really nice battle between the two of them, kind of going wheel to wheel through most of Sector 1. I think that was pretty close towards the end of the sprint. Honestly, most of the sprint, not a whole lot of action. Overtaking very, very difficult as most drivers were stuck in DRS trains. So it doesn't bode particularly well for tomorrow. But that being said, tire wear is high, and I do think we'll have a bit of an interesting strategical race in terms of perhaps one stop. I'm thinking more of a 2-stop just because we know tire deg's been so high here, and for example, Vegas as well. Although Vegas was, I think, obviously a very unique circumstances. Here we have the 3 hardest tire compounds, so it'll be interesting to see how that compares. Then final lap, a bit of an interesting one. Norris slows down, basically lets Piastri by, and he gives up basically the win in the sprint. Lets his teammate Piastri take it. So I think that was interesting. Of course, Norris had basically been holding back quite a bit through most of the sprint. Trying to make sure that he could give Piastri DRS the whole time, partially because I think they were just a bit down on straight line speed, and I think Russell was, without that DRS, Russell I think would have had a lot more better chance of being able to overtake. But that being said, it seems like this was something that was probably arranged beforehand, where if it was a 1-2 going into the final lap, that they would swap positions, and this is probably kind of giving the favor back to Piastri after he gave up the win in the sprint in Brazil. So I kind of understand the gesture, but that being said, I would have preferred if, Piastri had just won the sprint in Brazil, as he was kind of the better driver there, and I would have preferred if Norris won the sprint here, as he was definitely the better of the 2 McLarens today. So we'll be interested to see how that dynamic evolves going into 2025, obviously starting from scratch. And yeah, so that'll be really interesting. So that was basically a result for the sprint. Not a whole lot of changes. So it was won by Piastri, Norris second, Russell third, Sainz fourth, fifth Leclerc, sixth Hamilton, seventh Hulkenberg, 2 key points for him and for Haas in the Constructors' Championship. 8th Verstappen, 9th Gasly, 10th Magnussen, 11th Alonso, 12th Bottas, 13th Stroll, 14th Ocon, 15th Albon, 16th Lawson, 17th Tsunoda, 18th Colapinto, 19th Zhou, and 20th was Perez. So for Perez as well, not a great Grand Prix, or not Grand Prix sprint. Had some kind of issue at the start, starting from the pit lane. Colin Pinto basically just passed him in the pit exit. And then, of course, pitted as well for a new front wing. So I think Red Bull just really experimenting with things on Perez's car, as given how short the sprint is, and given how overtaking is not really was really difficult today. I think they were basically just experimenting, and I think it did have dividends pay later in the day. So there you go. That's the result for the sprint. Now we're going to move on to qualifying itself. So for qualifying, bit of an interesting session. I'm not entirely happy with how things went at the very end, but that's mostly just because I'm a purist. I don't like grid penalties at all. But we'll get there. Let's see. So for qualifying for Q1, Magnussen track time deleted first lap. Colapinto time deleted first lap as well. So a bit of a rough session for those two drivers at the very beginning. For one of them, it would definitely turn around, and I think he had a pretty good session. But for the other, I think it was another rough session, which has been a pretty rough weekend. But that being said, for Colapinto, it does feel like he doesn't have the full set of parts on his Williams running old front wing. But again, he has to take a little bit of a blame for that, as he's the one who basically busted up the parts last time out in Vegas. Last five drivers in the bottom five with 10 minutes left in Q1. Your Colapinto, Lawson, Sainz, Gasly, and Ocon. Magnussen had another moment, turn 3, so yeah, going really up to the limit there. With 5 minutes left in the session, you had Hulkenberg, Albon, Zhou, Colapinto, and Ocon in the bottom five. And it turns out that the 5 drivers knocked down Q1. Albon, Lawson, Hulkenberg, Colapinto, and Ocon. So both Saubers got through to Q2. That's a big result for them. Very, very close at the end between Tsunoda, Albon, and Lawson. There was like less than a tenth of a second there. So could have easily have gone the other way. But no, Tsunoda was basically the one out of those three who got himself into Q2. Bit of a surprise, I think, for Hulkenberg and for Ocon. I think there was definitely more pace in both of their cars. So yeah, not sure what exactly went wrong there. I think for Hulkenberg, I think the team messed up the tire strategy with, tire warm up and that kind of thing. So it seemed like they were apologizing to him on the radio afterwards. But for Ocon, not really sure, just really off the pace, for whatever reason in qualifying. Again, getting into Q2, 9 minutes left in the session after the first runs. Zhou, Tsunoda, Gasly, Alonso, and Stroll were in the bottom five. Alonso hadn't set time yet, as his time was basically deleted for track limits. But 5 drivers who would end up getting knocked out in Q2: Gasly, Zhou, Bottas, Tsunoda, and Stroll. Bit unfortunate for Gasly. He was very, very close to getting past Perez for P10. So Perez does get into Q3 for what feels like the first time in a while. Decent enough job for him. Red Bull was definitely had much better pace in qualifying today. The gap between himself and Verstappen in the end looks pretty bad. So I think that was definitely, on that hand, looking at it that way, doesn't look so great for Perez, but I do think part of the result today was just, for whatever reason, Red Bull had a much better car in quali. And then for Stroll as well, I think a bit disappointing for him, given that his teammate got into Q3. So yeah, again, those 2 drivers I feel probably a little bit unfortunate for them. Then getting into final session of qualifying, Q3, very interesting session. A lot of drivers just going out on their own, doing their own thing, instead of the traditional, one run at the start, one run right at the end. There's a couple drivers basically going on the gap. You had Verstappen doing 2 runs on like one set of tires consecutively, so that was interesting. So starting off Q3, Alonso gets his time deleted. So I think the first time in Q2 is actually something else. Or maybe that was also another track limit deletion. But anyhow, Alonso gets another track limit deletion in Q3. Russell sets the benchmark of 1:20.575, so good lap for him. The Mercedes looking very, very good on 1 lap pace. McLaren, obviously the heavy favorites coming into this weekend, given the prevalence of high and medium speed corners, definitely felt like there was a little bit. They were a little bit off the pace of Russell's Mercedes today. Verstappen on his first lap goes 45 thousandths off of Russell's time, so very, very close between the two of them. Norris abandons his first lap as well, so that's not great for him. And then very, very surprisingly, at the very end of the session, anyway, Verstappen takes pole position with on the last lap. He basically did his first lap, the one I just mentioned before, did a cool down lap, and then did his final lap. So 2 runs on one set tires, a bit of an interesting choice. That's not something you see that often in Q3. And especially you often don't see it where it's basically a lap that's good enough for second and then a lap that's good enough for pole. So interesting dynamics with the tires today. Of course, I was asleep, woke up this morning and watched the session when I woke up. So of course, with the benefit of hindsight and stuff, they showed this right on the replay. But basically, before I think Russell's final lap, or right before that, Verstappen was going slowly. Russell on his fast lap, and basically, Verstappen basically blocked him. Don't know if it was intentional. Don't think it was intentional or not. But basically, they decided to give Verstappen a 1-place grid penalty, which is a bit odd because usually it's a 3-place grid penalty. So not sure if they thought there was some kind of circumstances there that meant that the penalty was a bit less. But regardless, it sets up this interesting scenario where they basically just swap their positions. So Russell will be starting on pole position tomorrow with Verstappen P2. So lining up third on the grid, you have Norris, fourth Piastri, so McLaren 3-4. Definitely not probably what they were not expecting going into the session. Then you have Leclerc fifth, Hamilton sixth, Sainz seventh, eighth Alonso, ninth Perez. And yeah, the gap between Verstappen and Perez was about 9.5 tenths of a second, so not great for Perez there. There was definitely a lot of pace in the Red Bull, and Perez was behind Alonso in the Aston Martin, which has definitely not been a very quick car in recent races. But nonetheless, does get himself into Q3, so a little bit of solace there for Perez, and I think a better position for him to work with for the Grand Prix tomorrow. 10th Magnussen, 11th Gasly, 12th Zhou, 13th Bottas, 14th Tsunoda, 15th Stroll, 16th Albon, 17th Lawson, 18th Hulkenberg, 19th Colapinto, and 20th is Ocon. So there you go. There's the review of qualifying and the sprint for Qatar. Be interesting to see how the Grand Prix goes tomorrow. I think tire wear and who is best able to manage that will, I think, go a long way into determining things tomorrow. But that being said, I think the Mercedes have been very, very strong all weekend, so I wouldn't be entirely surprised if Russell converts another pole into another second consecutive Grand Prix win. But that being said, if Verstappen can get past him at the first corner, then I think all bets are off, and I think it'll be a very, very interesting fight. Maybe perhaps the McLarens get in the mix as well. So anyway, thank you so much for watching. Goodbye.